If he'd only grabbed the cloak, said Harry. It's just lying there. He turned to Hermione. If I just dashed out now and grabbed it, Snape would never be able to get it. And Harry, we mustn't be seen. How can you stand this? He asked Hermione fiercely. Just standing there watching it all happen, he hesitated. I'm going to go grab the cloak. Harry, no! Hermione seized the back of Harry's robes, not a moment too soon. Just then they heard a burst of song. It was Hagrid, making his way up to the castle, singing on top of his voice, weaving slightly as he walked, a large bottle swinging from his hands. See, Hermione whispered. What would have happened? We've got to keep out of sight. No, Buckbeak. The hippogriff was making frantic attempts to get a hold of to Hagrid again. Harry seized the rope too, straining the whole Buckbeak back. They watched Hagrid meander tipsily up to the castle, and he was gone. Buckbeak stopped fighting to get away. His head was drooped sadly. Barely 2 minutes later, the castle doors flew open again, and Snape coming out, charging out then, running towards the willow. Harry fists clenched as they watched Snape skid to a halt next to the tree, looking around. He grabbed the cloak and held it up. Get your filthy hands off it, Harry snarled under his breath. Shh! Snape seized the branch that Lupin used to freeze the tree to a dead stop on the knob and vanished from view. Then he put the cloak. So, that's it, said Hermione quietly. We're all down there? Now we just have to wait till we come back up again. She took the end of Buckbeak's rope and tied it securely to the nearest tree and sat down on the dry ground, arms around her knees. Harry, there's something I don't understand. Why wouldn't the Dementors get serious? I remember them coming, and then I think I passed out. There were so many of them. Harry sat down to explain what he'd seen, how the nearest Dementor had lowered its mouth to Harry. A large silver something came galloping across the lake and forced the Dementors to retreat. Hermione's mouth was slightly opened by the time Harry had finished. But what was it? There's only one thing it could have been to make the Dementors go, said Harry. A real Patronus. A powerful one. But who conjured it? Harry didn't say anything. He was thinking back to a person he had seen the other bank of the lake. He knew who he was, he thought. He thought he had seen, but how could it have been? Did you see what they looked like? Hermione said eagerly. Was it one of the teachers? No, said Harry. He wasn't a teacher. But it must have been a really powerful wizard to drive all those Dementors away. If the Patronus was shining so brightly, didn't it light him up? Couldn't you see? Yeah, I saw him, said Harry slowly, but maybe I imagined it. I wasn't thinking straight. I passed out right after. Who did you think it was? I think, Harry swallowed, knowing how strange this was going to sound. I think it was my dad. Harry glanced at Hermione, who saw her mouth was fully open now. She was gazing at him with a mixture of alarm and pity. Harry, your dad's, dead, she said quietly. I know that, said Harry quickly. You think you saw his ghost? I don't know. No, he looked solid, but then... Maybe I was seeing things, said Harry. But from what I could see, it looked like him. I've got photos of him, Hermione. He was still looking at him as though she was worried about his sanity. I know it sounds crazy, said Harry flatly. He turned and looked at Buckbeak, who was digging his beak into the ground, apparently searching for worms. But he wasn't really watching Buckbeak. He was thinking about his father and about his 3 oldest friends, Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs. All 4 of them had been off the grounds tonight. Wormtail had reappeared this evening when everyone had thought he was dead. Was it so impossible that his father had done the same? Had he been seeing things across the lake? The figure had been too far away, to see distinctly. And yet, he felt sure for a moment before he lost consciousness. The leaves overhead rustled faintly in the breeze. The motion drifted in and out as they sat behind the shifting clouds. Hermione sat with her face turned towards the willow, waiting. And then, at least after over an hour, "Here we come," Hermione whispered. She and Harry got to their feet. Buckbeak raised his head. They saw Lupin, Ron, Pettigrew, clambering awkwardly out of the hole into the woods, followed by unconscious by Snape, drifting weirdly upward. Next came Harry, Hermione, and Black. They all began to walk around the castle. Harry's heart was starting to beat very fast. He glanced up at the sky. Any moment now, the cloud was going to move astride and show the moon. "Harry," Hermione muttered as though she knew exactly what he was thinking. "We've got to stay put. We mustn't be seen. There's nothing we can do. So we're just going to let Pettigrew escape all over again," Harry said quietly. "How do you expect to find a rat in the dark?" snapped Hermione. "There's nothing we can do. We came back to help Sirius, and we're not supposed to do anything else." "All right." The moon slid out from underneath this cloud, and he saw the tiny figures across the ground stop. Then he saw movement. "There goes Lupin," Hermione whispered. "He's transforming." "Hermione," Harry said suddenly, "we've got to move." "We mustn't. I keep telling you not to interfere. Lupin's going to run into the forest right at us." Hermione gasped. "Quick!" So they motioned Dash to untie Buckbeak. "Quick!" Where are we going to go? Where are we going to hide? Dementors will be coming at any moment." "Back to Hagrid's?" Harry said. "It's empty now. Come on." They ran as fast as they could, Buckbeak cantering along behind them. They could hear the werewolf howling behind them. The cabin was in sight. Harry skidded to the door, wrenched it open. Hermione and Buckbeak flashed past him. Harry threw himself in after, and he bolted the door. Fang, Boarhound, barked loudly. "Shh, Fangs, it's us," said Hermione, hurrying over to scratch his ears and quiet him. "That was really close," she said. "Harry." "Yeah." Harry was looking out the window. It was much harder to see what was going on from here. Buckbeak seemed to be very happy to find himself back inside Hagrid's house. He lay down in front of the fire, folding its wings contentedly, and seemed ready for a good nap. "I think I'd better go outside again, said Harry, slowly. "I can't see what's going on. We won't know when it's time." Hermione looked up. Her expression was suspicious. "I'm not going to try to interfere," said Harry quickly. "But if we don't see what's going on now, how are we going to know what time to rescue Sirius?" "Well, okay, then. I'll wait here with Buckbeak. But Harry, be careful. There's a werewolf out there, and there's Dementors." Harry stepped outside again and edged around the cabin. He could hear the yelping in the distance. That meant the Dementors were closing in on Sirius. He and Hermione would be running in him at any moment. Harry stared down towards the lake, and he heard his heart doing a kind of drum roll in his chest. Whoever had sent that Patronus would be appearing at any moment. For a fraction of a second he stood irresolute in front of the Hagrid's door. "You must not be seen." But he didn't want to be seen. He wanted to do the seeing. He had to know. And there was the Dementors. They were emerging from the darkness from every direction, gliding around the edges of the lake. They were moving away from where Harry stood in the opposite bank. He wouldn't have time to get near them. Harry began to run. He had no thought of his head, except his father. If it was him, if it was really him, he had to know. He had to find out. The lake was coming nearer and nearer, but there was no sign of anybody. On the opposite side of the bank, he could see the glimmers of silver, his own attempts at a Patronus. There was a blush at the very edge of the water. Harry threw himself behind it. A bush behind the edge of the water. Harry threw himself behind it, peering desperately through the leaves. On the opposite bank, the glimmers of silver were suddenly extinguished. Terrified excitement shot through him. At any moment now. "Come on," he muttered, staring about. "Where are you, Dad? Come on." But no one came. Harry raised his head and took a circle of Dementors across the lake. One of them was lowering his hood, and it was time for the rescue to appear, but no one did. And then it hit him. He understood. He had seen his father. He had seen himself. Harry flung himself out from behind the bush and pulled out his wand. "Expecto Patronum!" he yelled. Out one of the end of his wand burst not a shapeless cloud of mist, but a blinding, dazzling silver animal. It screwed up his eyes trying to see what it was. It looked like a horse. It was galloping silently away from him across the black surface of the lake. He saw it lower its head and charge at the swarming Dementors. Now it was galloping around the lake, shapes on the ground. Dementors were falling back, scattering, retreating into the darkness. They were gone. The Patronus turned. It was cantering back towards Harry across the still surface of the water. It wasn't a horse. It wasn't a unicorn either. It was a stag. It was shining brightly on the moon above. It was coming back to him. It stopped on the bank of the hooves, made no mark on the soft ground, and it stared at Harry with large silver eyes. Slowly, it bowed its antlered head. And then Harry realized. "Prongs," he whispered. But as a trembling finger stretched towards the creature, it vanished. Harry stood there, hands still outstretched. Then, with a great leap in his heart, he heard hooves behind him. He whirled around and saw Hermione dashing towards him, dragging Buckbeak behind her. "What did you do?" she said fiercely. "You said you were only going to be the lookout." "I just saved all of our lives," Harry said. "Get behind here, behind the bush. I'll explain." Hermione listened to what had just happened with her mouth open. He did it again? Did anyone see you?" "Yes." "You've been listening. I saw me, but I thought I saw my dad, so it's okay." "Harry, I can't believe it. You conjured up a Patronus that drove away all those Dementors? That's very, very advanced magic." "I knew I could do it this time," said Harry, "because I'd already done it. Does that make sense?" "I don't know." Harry looked at Snape. Together they peered around the bush to the other bank. Snape had regained consciousness. He was conjuring stretchers and lifting the limp forms of Harry and Hermione back onto them. The fourth stretcher, no doubt bearing Ron, who was already floating in the side. Then the wand held out in front of him. He moved them away towards the castle. "Right. It's nearly time," said Hermione, tensely, looking at her watch. "We've got about 45 minutes until Dumbledore locks the door in the hospital wing. We've got to rescue Sirius and get back into the ward before anybody realizes we're missing." They waited, watching the moving clouds reflected the lake, while the bush next to it them whispered in the breeze. Buckbeak roared, ferreting for worms again. Said Harry, checking his watch. He looked at the castle and began counting the windows to the right of the west tower. "Look!" Hermione whispered. "Who's that? Someone's coming back out of the castle." Harry stared through the darkness. The man was hurrying across the grounds towards one of the entrance. Something shiny glinted in his belt. "McNair," said Harry, "the executioner. He's going to get the Dementors." What is it, Hermione?" Hermione put her hands on Buckbeak's back. Harry gave her a leg up. Then he placed his foot on the tower branches of the bush and climbed up in front of her. He pulled Buckbeak's rope back over his neck and tied it to the other side of his collar with reins. "Ready?" he whispered to Hermione. "You better hold on to me." He nudged Buckbeak's sides with his heels. Buckbeak soared straight into the dark air. Harry gripped the flanks with his knees, feeling the great wings rise powerfully beneath them. Hermione was holding Harry very tight around the waist. He could hear her murmuring, "Oh no, I don't like this. I really, really don't like this." Harry urged Buckbeak forward. They were gliding quietly to the upper wood floors of the castle. Harry pulled hard on the left side of the rope, and Buckbeak turned. Harry was trying to count the windows flashing past. "Whoa," he said, pulling backward as hard as he could. Buckbeak slowed down and they found themselves at a stop. Unless you counted the fact that they kept rising up, down several feet, the hippogriff beat his wings to remain airborne. He's there, Harry said, spotting Sirius as they rose up beside the window. He reached out as Buckbeak's wings fell, and able to tap sharply on the gas. Black looked up. Harry saw his jaw drop. He leapt up from his chair, hurried to the window, and tried to open it, but it was locked. "Stand back!" Hermione called him, and she took out her wand, still gripping it, the back of Harry's robes with the left hand. "Elamora!" The window sprang open. How? Said Black weakly, staring at the hippogriff. "Get on. There's not much time," said Harry, gripping the back Buckbeak firmly on either side of his sleek neck, and to hold him steady. "You've got to get out of here. The Dementors are coming. McNair's gone to get them." Black placed his hand on either side of the window frame, heaved his head and shoulders out of it. It was very lucky he was so thin. In seconds he had managed to fling one leg on Buckbeak's back and pull himself to the hippogriff behind Hermione. "Okay, Buckbeak, up," said Harry, shaking his rope. Up to the tower, come on." The hippogriff gave a sweep and a mighty swings, and they were soaring upwards again. High in the air to the west tower, Buckbeak landed with a clatter on the battlements, and Harry and Hermione slid off at once. "Sirius, you better go quick," Harry panted. They'll reach Flitwick's office any moment. They'll find out you've gone." Buckbeak pawed the ground, tossing his sharp head. "What happened to the other boy?" "Wrong," croaked Sirius. "He's going to be okay. He's still out of it. But Madame Pomfrey says she'll be able to make him better quick. Quick, go!" But Black was still staring down at Harry. "How can I ever think—" "Go!" Harry and Hermione shouted again together. Black wheeled Buckbeak around, facing the open sky. "We'll see each other again," he said. "You are truly, truly your father's son, Harry." He squeezed Buckbeak's sides with his heels. Harry and Hermione jumped back. The enormous ring rose once more, and the hippogriff took off into the air. He and his rider became smaller and smaller and smaller. Harry gazed after them. The cloud drifted across the moon. They were gone.